Well, welcome. This is it. I'm ATB, and this is Sold. We're doing something a little bit different tonight. Now, typically, when we open a wave, it's me standing in a much worse lit room with much less interesting clothing, and I just get to watch all the orders pour in briefly before I finally get tired and go to bed. But tonight, at the persistence of so many of you who have asked, man, I really wish I could make it to one of your events. Good news and bad news. I'm bringing the event to you. The bad news is you have to listen to a guy in his late 30s with a sequin jacket talk about art for 30 minutes. Your mileage may vary, but I'm really excited that you've come here to see this. Though we may be separated spatially, and if you're watching this in the future, separated temporally, it is a pleasure to stand in front of you and have an opportunity to talk about this lifelong work of art. So let's go ahead and start talking about that art. Before every event, I always give a little bit of background, and the background takes us back about 30 years. It's the origin of SOULED, though I didn't know it at the time. It was June 18th, 1993, and my father and I were celebrating Father's Day and my 8th birthday because they fell on the same day that year. It was a couple days before. June 20th was the actual date, but we're at a neighbor's pool. We got a whole weekend of fun things planned. But I left my goggles behind in a neighbor's truck, and my dad went to go back and get them. And by the time he came back, I was standing on the diving board, and I was hoping he would toss them to me so I could jump off the diving board and grab them in midair. He didn't do that. Instead, he clenched them between his teeth and he dove into the pool. He thought he was diving into the deep end, and he was pretty close to the deep end, but fractions of a distance off. So as I'm standing on the diving board, he jumps in, splash, and then his body floats up to the surface, motionless. His back is sort of bobbing in the water. And no one really thinks a whole lot of it at first. At least this is the way I recall it. He sits there for what must have been a few seconds before someone says, "Oh shit, he's hurt." So my mom, who was also there, and our neighbor, obviously, they jump in and drag him out. And he thinks he's swimming the whole time, but it's pretty evident when he says, "I can't feel anything and I can't move," that something is really, really wrong. He was paralyzed from the neck down, and he stayed that way permanently for the rest of his life. He was 36 when that happened. And when you're 36, suddenly, when I turned 36 at least, the realization of how much different my father's life became as a result of that accident really started to sink in. You know, when you're 8, you feel like 36 is old. When you turn 36, it doesn't feel that old at all. And compounding that with a prognosis, he was given a prognosis of about 10 years to live, and he knew they wouldn't be easy years. But that was it. And he ends up, there's a little bit of a light side on this story. He ends up making it 22 years. And I think a lot of that is owed to the fact that he basically lived for everyone around him. And it feels weird to say this. It felt weird to say it growing up. It still does now. But he always, his whole thing was, if Adam is 8 years old and I've got 10 years, then I can live for 10 more years and get him through high school. And then he just continued to live for everybody else that he possibly could, which is a pretty remarkable story. So when I turned 36 a couple years ago, I start thinking about how much my father lost in that moment. And I decided to kind of course correct my life. Not that my life was bad. I've got a beautiful fucking family, a great job. I own a brand consultancy, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so when faced with that finiteness of the fact that you've got just a tiny piece of time on this planet, it forced me into thinking about doing something differently. And so I immersed myself in this art project, which eventually became SOULED. And it is a lifelong project. It is time-based, and it uses context as a medium. So while we do have these printed works, right, that are artifacts in my mind, the real art is in essence what's happening right now. And that's a weird thing to say, standing in a studio by yourself, talking into a black void and wondering who is on the other side listening. But this is the context that we're opening up today. Let's talk a little bit about how SOULED works. If you're just now kind of immersing yourself in this very complicated work of art, this is the general idea. SOULED is released in waves, and waves are a series of 12 identical works which are sold sequentially, one at a time, over the course of a 12-day period. So one wave, 12 works sold for 12 days. But each time a work sells, the next one doubles in value. So the wave that we're opening tonight is wave 4, Deal with the Devil. The first work starts at $4. After that one sells, the second one will sell for $8, and then the next one will be available for $16, $32, $64, $128, all the way up through the 12th work at $8,192. And if that work sells before the end of the 12 days, that's great. But if it doesn't, whatever doesn't sell will be destroyed in the performance of a wake, which you may have seen on SOULED's web-based installation. The wakes are basically me burning the artwork that doesn't actually sell. There are a series of marks that go on these as well. So you've got a birthmark that is always applied to the first work sold. In the event all works sell, a life mark is applied to the 12th work. And in the event that not every work sells within a wave before the 12 days is up, the last work to sell receives a death mark. Gosh, it is a surreal moment standing here thinking about the people who are viewing this that are not in the room with me. But we're going to keep on proceeding anyway. This evening at 8:49, I will open wave 4, Deal with the Devil. It's a little bit of a departure from the previous 3 waves. The first wave, of course, was Beautiful, Curious, Breathing, Laughing Flesh, a not so subtle nod to Walt Whitman. The second wave opened in July. It was Born Against the Current. And here recently, we opened wave 3, and that was gosh, now I'm forgetting my own wave's name. An awfully big adventure. Most of those waves relating in some part back to some essence of my father, but not every wave in SOULED is a reference back to the man that raised me. This wave in particular is a little bit more inward looking. There are some very overt themes around Christianity, because that's the faith that I grew up in, being born in the Bible Belt. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and share some of the background. But I want to be really clear about something, and that's that I don't think that any of these waves need my interpretation in order to be valid. There is an idea in the art world. It's an early 20th century philosophy called the beholder's share. And it basically stipulates that the art really isn't activated until someone else can view it. And in my mind, the art then kind of happens in between the two places. You've got the object that you're looking at, and the person on the other side of that. And the art right there is in the middle. But for what it's worth, let's take a quick look at wave 4. You do not have access to this at present. The web-based installation is currently locked, but I wanted to read a little bit about the wave in question. Give me one moment to pull that up. So as you know, in every wave, I have a little blurb. So sometimes it has a little bit of a musical quality to it. Oftentimes it doesn't. But this one is Savored the Savior, Lost and Found Reborn, back up on my bad behavior with a crown of horns. And then below that, a little bit of something resembling an artist statement. And this is what it says. I've got these demons, and I love them to death. They are mischievous miscreants, impulsive children in my custody. They are my dearest bundles of desire and craving. So I keep an eye on them, but never too close. It's good to let them roam. My demons are free range. They respect my limits with capricious delight as I indulge their urges with similar abandon. They are good children, after all, just rough around the edges. Antidotes against my self-righteous angels. When I grew up, I grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I went to a church when I was in my teens, and it was a charismatic church. It said it was non-denominational. It was very Southern Baptist, and it had a very persuasive lock on my identity. And I recall one instance in particular in which I was walking through the halls of my high school and felt this really odd emotional twinge that gave way to this kind of dumb weeping. I'm embarrassed talking about it even now, because I had this self-righteous idea that, gosh, everyone that doesn't believe how I believe is doomed for an eternity in hell. And even saying it now with this much distance in between it's a very kind of cringy attitude to take. And I've evolved since then. I think I'm in a different place, at least. At one point in my life, I basically swore off all religion, basically taking on a more basically considering myself an atheist. I'm not there anymore. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think it is equally dogmatic to assert that there is nothing, as there is to assert that there is something, and it is this exact thing. And so I'm trying, at least in my late 30s now, to embrace an idea that maybe I just don't know what the fuck is going on, and that's okay too. So that's a little bit of the background on Wave 4, but it really does kind of deal, the title specifically, with a kind of double entendre, right? Deal with the devil. On the one hand, you can make a deal with the devil, right? And oftentimes this is used as an expression to indicate that you are submitting in some way. You are making a deal, trading something of value, often something of virtue, even in exchange for wealth, fame, power, etc. But you trade that, and you give something away. Another interpretation of the title might be to deal with the devil, as in to recognize that this, whatever it is, doesn't really have so much power over you. It's more about resilience. And I like this kind of dualistic effect. And what's interesting to me, at least about this wave, because when I see these things, I see them contemporaneously with you, right? My interpretation of them changes as I evolve with the art as well, even though it's still very fresh. It's a very nubile baby piece of art, wet behind the horns, if you will. This one, it looks as if that, it looks like someone has scratched out a face around the eye, but if you look closer, you can see that those etchings are actually a part of the actual work. They are enmeshed. And I think that's an important idea, because it recognizes that things are not so black and white, good and evil. There is a healthy mix of gray in between. And that's probably a good place to be. I have just now looked into the chat, and Jeremy Randolph has asked, I have a question. What is the significance of the eye in your works? That's a tremendous question. If you look back to the Runway 5 series, this was the initial series of waves that I released and sold, basically to test the idea and make sure that the installation worked, that everything would flow as intended. And I left that blank. I intended to make sure that the context in which that almond shape existed took precedence over the eye itself. And then, of course, the eye was revealed in multiple variations at When We Were 36, which is the debut event that was hosted at the Loudon House on June 17th, the night before Wave 1 released. The significance of the eye, there are a couple things. There is a functional attribute to it, but there's also a kind of philosophical attribute to it as well. Let's handle the philosophical first, because it's very squishy and it'll be fun to work around with. If we want to go with the cliched version, and I have been accused of being cliche, I'm fine with that. The eye is the window to the soul. Cool. All right. Now that we've gotten that low hanging fruit out of the way, moving on. Sold is really, in my opinion, a lot about how we perceive things, and the meaning and value that we perceive is really based on the context in which we, the perceiver, are surrounded. I'm often noted for saying that we are the product of our context, and so perception weighs super heavily in these works, which is why I tell people, like, my interpretation is not the exclusive interpretation of the work. It requires somebody else on the other side to see it. And frankly, 10 years from now, I'll look at these things and I'll probably bring to it 10 years worth of additional context that didn't exist, and I'll get to witness it as an audience all over again and maybe conjure up some different kind of meaning. I also like the idea that the waves are watching us. If you have a work and it sits on your wall, it looks back at you. This particular wave has a little bit of a nod to Rene Magritte's The False Mirror. And if you were to type that into Google right now, it would immediately take you to an image that would feel very familiar if you haven't seen it before. It is just this giant eye, and the iris is effectively a cloud field with a black pupil right in the middle. It's interesting to hear people talk about interpretations of this work. One of its most famous owners, a photographer, the name escapes me. I think he's quoted as saying that work has seen as much as the people who have viewed it. I am bastardizing the hell out of that quote, so let's not Google that one. But the intent is effectively the same. The piece is looking out while you are looking in. In a way, it's a little bit of a totem, right? If we're going to talk about this, let's talk a little bit about behavioral science. People behave differently when they're being watched, which I think is a very interesting thing. Really, just having the image of eyes around someone affects the way that they behave, and I find that fascinating. And so, if the eye in these waves can serve as some kind of totem, a way to remember that the time that we have on this planet is so very fucking brief. So you better be doing something meaningful to you with it. Then I think it served a purpose beyond just sitting on your wall. So that's how I would begin to describe that. Obviously, I've been sitting with this stuff for 2 years now, working out the details. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things I love about it is that SOULED is very process driven. While there are certain pieces of it that are very, very rigid, right? I've built this exquisite, intricate box of context, rules within which the SOULED has to exist. It serves more or less as an anchor. So I get to color in every page differently every single time, but there's something that holds it steady, and that's, for me, very important. I think creativity is born from constraint, and you're starting to see some of the constraints that I, as an artist, am working with, while at the same time getting to take a look at the creative ways in which, hopefully I'll be able to manipulate it for not only the foreseeable future, but literally until the day that I die. Which is a great segue into another question I was asked a few weeks ago. When I launched SOULED as the very first series of waves, Runway 5, I reached out to a lot of members of the press, contributors to different news outlets and things like that. And I had one woman give me a call back from the Louisville Courier-Journal. And excuse me. And we were talking on the phone, and she says, "Okay, so you're 38." And I say, "Yeah." And she goes, "Okay. And this is a lifelong project." And I say, "Yes, it's a lifelong project." And she goes, "Okay. So what do you think the 76-year-old version of you is going to think about all of this?" And I'll be honest with you, I hadn't given it nearly as much thought as I probably should have. Because the truth is, this beautiful box that I described a moment ago, with all of its intricate facets and immaculate detail, it very well could be a casket, right? This is not an easy task to take on. It's one that I'm prepared to, and it's one I'm excited to take on. And for the first time in basically my entire life, I don't feel like I'm driving directly towards a goal 24/7. The process basically gives me the meaning and the joy that I'm looking for out of a lifelong work. But the truth is, we've got this weird concept in our heads that we are always at the point in which we will stay. It's called the oh gosh, the history of illusion, or the illusion of history. Ah, shit. Again, whenever you're alive, you sometimes drop the details. The point is this: as you go through life, you sort of begin to believe that where you are at this point is the person that you will be in perpetuity. But the truth is, the person I am now is not the person I was 10 years ago. The person I was when I was 28 is not the person I was when I was 18. And while I do think we get a little bit more set and rigid in our ways, the truth is, 76-year-old me may be really fucking pissed about all of this. I hope not. But at the end of the day, this person is as much a stranger to me as I am right now a stranger to my, 18-year-old self 20 years in the past. So I get to deal with that. And you do too, if you decide to participate in SOULED. I did anticipate that there would be a little bit of a lag in questions. SOULED is very, very new at this present moment. So I did take some time to generate some questions that I thought might be of interest. One of those was, do you see the exponential pricing structure primarily as conceptual commentary or a necessary means to fund the lifelong project? I am not shy about discussing the multiple different views that someone can take on SOULED. There is a very sincere perspective. There is also a cynical perspective. I think these two live hand in hand. It's a bit of a turn on modernism, meta modernism. For me, the pricing structure is primarily conceptual. It is also functional. So the answer to that question, frankly, is yes. Ultimately, I want to be in a position where I can continue to manifest as much context as I possibly can around these works. Would it be nice if if SOULED provided some kind of livelihood? Yes. That makes some people uncomfortable. And I think that's crazy. We've got this really weird kind of dualistic expectation for artists. On the one hand, we demand, artists should be paid for their valuable contributions to society. On the other hand, gosh, we only really value the ones that have suffered a little bit, that have, really paid their dues. And we like that story. Because when you look at the top 1% of 1% of artists that are making just gobs of money, they are under an intense microscope, and frankly, a lot of people don't like their work. They find it very derivative, and that is an issue that I'm going to have to navigate with SOULED, because it does take into account the market. And that's an uncomfortable thing. If you ask anyone who knows anything about art, they'll tell you as soon as an artist starts creating work for the market, that's when their work starts to lose its edge. Yet I'm going to have to navigate it anyway. At the end of the day, this is still something that's erupting out of me. And if the market responds, then great. And if it doesn't, then I'll just burn them all. And I'm okay with that. Another question or some comments. Michael Braley, I want to be alive to know 76-year-old Adam. You are welcome to join me on the journey. I do anticipate you'll have to up your vitamin intake, but I will see you there. Yemi asks, people should be paid for their work, whether or not they suffer for their art. I totally agree. Look, I'm going to preface this by saying that I don't wholesale buy into every word that comes out of Bill Maher's mouth. I do agree with some of it. And I was listening to the podcast version of his show some months back. I forget who he was talking to, but he had this really interesting turn of phrase. He says, art is our receipt for trauma, something of that nature. And I thought, oh shit, that kind of hits close to home. Because while I've been working on this entire time, believe me, I have thought to myself, well, am I commodifying my father's accident? Am I taking something that really, to some extent, isn't even my story? I walked away that day and I'm still alive. And that man is not. I think it's good to ask the question, and I ask myself often. I don't think I am. I might be self-deluding myself. I'm always open to the possibility that I don't know everything about myself. But I can tell you the presence and patience that SOULED has already begun to afford me, it undermines that interpretation. This is very stressful for me right now. I've made no excuses for that. I enjoy doing it, but this is a very performance part. This does not feel meditative to me at all. This is a little uncomfortable. But whenever this isn't happening, when there aren't 100 people in the room or 100 people behind a camera, when I'm not holding a work of art and setting it on fire and trying not to catch on fire myself, when all of that stuff goes away, the residue of those experiences, it gets into almost every single day of my life, and I've started to grow more appreciative of the moments that exist outside of SOULED. One last question, and then we got to open this thing up. So Quentin asks, why did you decide to burn the remaining art instead of shredding it or something else? A couple of reasons. I really, one, visually, it's a lot more interesting to look at. I recognized early on that the light from the fire has an illuminating effect, so that makes for a very good artistic expression that can then be documented on video. So functionally, that's an interesting thing to do. But I don't want this work to be recovered. Right? It's transformed after that point. We can do a theological call to ashes, dust to dust, and that's interesting, albeit cliche again. But when these works are destroyed, they're gone. And that means you have to start reckoning with how the value actually accrues in these waves. Is it more valuable if all 12 works sell, the last one for a absurdly high price compared to the first? Or is it more valuable when the remaining works are scarce and there's only a few of them? SOULED intends to ambiguate these ideas so that you can actually get beneath the surface of, wow, that's a big work of art. Wow, that's an expensive work of art. And you can begin to start thinking of what the meaning and value of the work actually is for you. It's a very democratic work, a lifelong work, in that you are not restricted from participating based on how much you have. And instead, the only thing that restricts your participation, I think, is how much you desire to be a part of it. I think that's right. We'll have to find out. In 1 minute and 47 seconds, I'm going to open wave 4 at souled.art, SOULED.art. I'm probably not going to talk as much as I have been now because it does require a lot of focus to make sure that I don't screw anything up. This is not an automated process, but I'm going to let you watch while I'm doing it, just so you have an idea for how this works behind the scenes. In general, just to give you some advanced context, the first 6 works in every wave tend to go very, very quickly in seconds and minutes. After that, the demand begins to depreciate quite a bit. On my screen over here, I've got dual monitors, and what I'm looking at is the live view from Shopify, which handles all the commercial transaction stuff. And then I have a preview of the website itself, which is counting down. On a second screen, I have all the links that I'll need in order to update the site. So each work is individually placed onto the web-based installation once the previous one sells. And then I have the editor from Webflow, which is where the front end of the site exists. So with that being said, I'm looking now. We've got 35 seconds. If you'll please be patient with me, I'm going to go get things set up to launch this wave. Five. 4, 3, 2, 1. The installation is now publishing, and it says it should be published. And there, in fact, it is. Looking at the live view on Shopify to determine how much activity is actually happening. There are 10 total sessions and 22 total sessions. There are 4 visitors, 5, it's climbing, and the first work is sold. Okay, so we will grab the link for the second one and begin updating the site to reflect the change in the wave. That means I have to update the number of the work. All of this is manual. Perhaps there's a better way to do it, but this is just fine by me. We have to update the current price, as well as indicate that work 1 has sold. Update button. So if you're waiting, be patient. We're good. We'll get you there. All right. And we are publishing this now. Work 2 is currently available. And so now we just wait. There are currently, just to give you an idea for what the activity is on my side, I'm currently showing that there are 16 total people that are working towards acquiring work 2. And work 2 just sold. So now I can go and grab the link for work 3 and begin the process anew. Here's the thing. I, at one point in time, thought that this entire process needed to be automated because that's the way the world works. I have since changed my thinking on that a great deal. The fact that I have to participate live, I think adds an additional layer of meaning to the experience of purchasing these works. It also means that there's a degree of presence that I have to have as an artist in creating the context. It's not something that just runs on autopilot. All right, we will publish. "17 visitors currently, 18. This number has gone up to right around between 40 and 50 in the past. I don't believe the number of concurrent checkout sessions or checkout visitors has ever exceeded 50, but that's where we are there. Michael Braley, people either like your work or they don't. People pay you for what it's worth or won't. It's up to the artist designer to determine what their fee is and to be paid such worth. I agree, but it's an interesting social contract that you have with the purchaser of the work. What is the true value of the art? Right now, I can safely say that it's at least $16. At least the third work is worth $16. It just sold. So now we'll grab the fourth and begin the process anew. There's an argument to be had that I should probably be updating this before things sell, anticipating that more works will sell in the future. I don't do that, though. I think it's a little presumptuous to think that there are people out there that are that hungry for whatever it is that you've produced. An odd dose of humility from a man standing in a room full of colorful lights with a sequin jacket and sunglasses on his face. I know. I paid the same amount for shipping as I did for the art, $16. Great. So now, here's a question, Quentin. You just posted in the chat. what is the value of the work to you at this point? Right? Like, is it lesser value to you because you paid $16 for it? Would you have valued it more if you paid 160 or 1600? I'm curious to know, because again, I think the perception on the other side of this equation, not just me, not just the work, but you, the person who is viewing and participating in the project, what is your assessment of the value? We are at 19 visitors right now and 30 total sessions. Goodness gracious. And work 4 is sold as well. All right, moving on down the line. Work 5, here we go. I'll be updating the site, all the numbers. One moment, please. This will be the 5th work in wave 4. This one, because of the way that the price is double exponentially, is at 64. And that should be live there. All right, so Quentin says, I separate the shipping cost from the art. Well, Lord, I'd hope so. And I value the art fairly highly, but the shipping cost irks me. Perhaps one day, shipping will no longer be an issue. Although I do think it's important at present to separate the value of the work from the value of the shipping. Here's something interesting. The cost of creating each of these works is such that for about the first half of each wave, I am paying you, the collector, to take them, which I'm fine with, right? Like, it is perfectly plausible that this project, I lose my shirt on it, and that's fine. I'll continue doing it in whatever capacity that I can financially sustain to do it. Again, it's not really about the money as much as it is trying to untangle how we think about meaning and value, not just in art, but also in terms of our remaining time. All right. And work 5 has sold. And so we go on now to work 6. Whew. It is hot in here for all of you not wearing sequin jackets. Jesus, what was I thinking? Okay, all right, moving along. Make sure I got the right one. Okay. All right. And now we go again. So as you can see, these first few works, here's something to consider. And I think about this, I thought about it before I started working on this, but now having participated on the other side of it, it's really interesting to me. Which of these works are more valuable overall, right? Like, that first work is always incredibly difficult to get. It's always difficult to purchase, not because it's expensive, but because the demand for it is so high. More people have access to it because their finances accommodate a purchase at that level. Or is it more difficult to get a later work? Financially, yes, of course. Like, not all of us have, 4 to 5 to 6 figures to drop on a work of art. That's fair. But the demand slows to such a pace that you could wait days before anyone actually purchases a later work. I'm curious too. Is it more difficult to purchase a life mark, the 12th work? Currently, only 3 waves, including the pre-release series Runway 5, have ever sold up through 10 works. I believe that's correct. The 11th and 12th works have never sold, unsold up until this point. So work 6 is still available, it looks like. And the demand begins to drop precipitously off a cliff. So current visitors within the Shopify site is now at 6. And this is pretty common, at least it's been from my experience. Again, like the demand, it immediately starts to go down after those first few initial works are gone. And then you've got that 12-day window remaining in which the others may be acquired. Quentin, yeah, there's also the gamified aspect. If you are holding out until the end, you might get that death or life mark. That's very true. And look, it is interesting to talk about this in the context of it being a game. I think it's a super valid interpretation. There is a gamification aspect to it. It's kind of unavoidable the way that I've set it up. But I do think there are different types of people that will engage with this project over time. There will absolutely always be those people who value this as some kind of financial instrument, right? And that's how a lot of the upper echelons of the art market actually work. In that case, you are hoping to purchase something and then keep your fingers crossed that it accrues value, and you can then either donate it to a museum and write it off on your taxes, or you can resell it at auction or through a personal sale, and you have profited a tidy sum of money. That is a thing that you could do. I do think that there are people who are going to engage with this on a purely aesthetic level as well, and that tends to be maligned a little bit. This idea that we would purchase art or engage with art strictly because of its decorative value. I'm not here for that. I think if you choose to value art based on how it looks in your home and how it makes you feel and how it tickles your eyeballs, then good on you. There's no one's going to judge you over on this side of the camera. I also think too, and I will say I know this for a fact based on the conversations I've had with people over the last couple of years. They are participating in SOULED and thinking about SOULED from the perspective of what its innermost intent is intended to be, which is a meditation on time and the increasing value of what we have left. In the period of time that I was waxing on work 6 sold. So there you go. We are now on to work 7. This one for $256. Work 6 is now sold. Like I said, this is pretty typical to see the first half of the wave move quickly within a matter of minutes. All right. We should be good. $256. That is correct. And that is work 7. All right, checking back in. Are the works printed on acid-free paper? Of course they are. They are printed on Arches 88. It is a 100% cotton hand-molded paper from France. And all of the works are screen printed on those. They're also packed in acid-free packaging because, the art is important. We want it to last as long as possible. That being said, though, it's gonna deteriorate. That's intentional. It doesn't last forever. Paper is really hard to take care of. It's not just the acidic nature of its surroundings, but also the moisture, the light that could potentially hit these things if they're placed in direct sunlight could fade the colors. These works, not unlike us. They will fade with time. They are temporary. They don't last forever. And I find that fascinating as well. But how do you think the value of wave 1 will increase or decrease based on new, potentially, or not better work? Is it demand or execution of design? Clarification, I meant potentially better or not better. Who's the judge, right? Yeah, I don't know. Here's a cool thing that I really kind of hope happens. And I don't have any guarantee that it will, but it makes me excited to think about. I would love in the future for some of these early works from early waves to be hanging on someone's wall, and through some incredible stroke of good fortune, SOULED takes off exponentially in a way that affords it, recognition, but also maybe some financial value as well. And it amuses me to think that someone who potentially bought a work from an early wave, spending less than $100 or even less than 1,000, now suddenly has to reckon within 10 years that they have a 5 or 6 figure work of art on their wall. And they have to determine what the value of that work is. Do they stick with the philosophical underpinnings of the work, recognizing that the value of the art is doing exactly what it's intended to do, which is increase in value over time, like our time does? Or is it a down payment on a house? Is it something that you can sell and send your kid to college on? I, I don't know, but I hope you struggle with it. I hope it's a sincere struggle. I struggle with it when I handle these things in my studio, because I have to sign them, I have to package them up. Every time I do, I am rattled to death with nerves, because I understand, or rather, I guess I perceive the value that has accrued in the works that remain after the wake. And work 7 has just sold. So one moment, we'll move to work 8. I hope this isn't boring you. I got to be honest, I didn't really know what to expect with this. I'm very pleased with how things have gone so far in terms of the conversation. I've calmed down a little bit, which is nice. So I appreciate you sticking with me and keeping me company while we do this. I mentioned earlier that my dad, he lived as long as he did, I think, because he had people to care for. Hang on, this is important. Let me take care of this, and I'll return back to the conversation. Just give you my full attention. Okay. So this is work 8 now. And work 8 is available for $512. Okay. If you've ever heard of the Harvard study, it's this multi-generational study that was conducted initially on a bunch of white, educated, affluent men, and subsequently their families over generations. And what the Harvard study was intended to do, it's been passed on from researcher to researcher. It was intended to uncover what contributed to a long and happy life. And they found there were 3 factors that were really pretty important. But one stood out above the others. Genetics is important, right? If you have a history of cancer or heart disease or anything else in your family line, it likely will have an impact on your expected longevity. Also, behaviors affect this. If you are drinking all the time, that could have a depreciating effect on your overall health outcomes. If you smoke, if you drive recklessly, these are things that can shorten a life. So if you've got great genes, and you take good care of your body, these 2 things contribute to a long life, but it's not the most impactful thing. And this is so fucking cool. I get excited every time I talk about it. The most impactful thing in determining a long life is the number and quality of relationships that you have with other people. And it highlights for me just how fucking social we are as animals on this planet, that the largest, most significant determinant of whether or not you live a long life is based on your connections to other people. I'm a TA for Section. This is Scott Galloway's online business upskilling platform. It's a great gig filled with wonderful people who I'm very lucky to call colleagues. But when you work for a company that's owned by Scott, you tend to end up, absorbing a lot of what he has to say. And one of the things that I believe he said in the past is this idea that it's like there is this camera that lives inside our brain, and it looks for people to take care of. And as soon as those people begin to leave us, that's when we begin to leave as well. It's like there is some biological security system that in order to survive, we have to help other people survive. And I think that's a really beautiful sentiment. I love it immensely. All right, looking back in, Do you have some secret printed versions in your archive? I have, yes, artist proofs. At one point in time, I thought, you know what? I'm going to call these soul proofs. And I'm not against the idea, but even as someone who engages in cliche on a fairly regular basis, even that felt a little bit like a bridge too far. Here's the cool news, though. I've got several years left in me, so maybe we'll change that at some point. But no, there are artist proofs that I maintain, and these are what gets exhibited at shows in the future. So whenever you go to a souled show, as it is now, you've noticed that there's always a box of new work. It's a shadow box that you look down in on, a bit like a cradle, as it were. There's the cliche again. And so you're looking down on it, and all 12 works from that wave are stacked on top of each other in that shadow box. However, waves that have already completed, those are framed and hung on walls in the gallery. Those are the artist proofs. I think that's important. Again, in terms of thinking about, well, what is the meaning and value of these works? They accrue meaning and value when they are seen, when they are placed in specific contexts, right? So I think that has an important effect, not only just in terms of being able to see the progression and observe how the waves have changed over a lifetime, but also in terms of the fact that, you know, if you own a work from wave one, the likelihood that the artist proof from that wave will be exhibited in the future is really high. That context changes it. It changes it substantially. So yes, I do retain those. They are not for sale. I also, incidentally, retain the ashes from the burnt works. And I don't know what I'm going to do with those yet. People love to give me recommendations for what to do with them. And I'm always happy to hear it, right? A lot of SOULED is... a lot of SOULED is built on conversations that I have with people all the time. But I don't really know how that works. In fact, one of the questions that I wrote down earlier this evening is, do I have a plan to document and archive SOULED to preserve its legacy beyond my own finite lifetime? If so, how? Earlier, I mentioned this thing that I don't know my 76-year-old self. I don't know who that person is. Frankly, he may be fucking dead for all I know. But it feels premature to me to have a solidified plan on what the legacy of this is. And presently, I don't know that it's been around long enough to even secure a legacy beyond a beautiful, wonderful, close-knit, sometimes extended group of friends and colleagues and acquaintances, and new audiences as well. It just hasn't achieved a reach substantial enough to have a legacy to preserve. But believe me, while all of you all are thinking about, you know, whether or not you want to be cremated or buried or thrown off a ship at sea, I'm trying to figure out what the hell to do with what I hope becomes dozens, if not hundreds, of waves, and hopefully, as the process goes, fewer collections of ashes. But I don't know yet, and I'm very comfortable in that mystery. Here we go. Who is the fella in wave 0.6? This is a pre-release wave. It was the second one. That is Gustave Caillebotte. That is a self-portrait that he painted of himself. He was one of the early French Impressionists who you very likely have not heard of. He does not tend to run in the same circles as Monet and Cézanne and all of their ilk. And the reason is because his work was not really loved by the art world at the time. Neither were his contemporaries. They called them les intransigeants. I don't know. I haven't had French in literal decades now, which is gross to say. So I don't know if I got that right. But the fact is, he collects all of their work. And I believe there are 7 Impressionist painters who basically comprise the core of the French Impressionist canon. The reason that they comprise the core is because he collected all of their work. And upon his death, he donated all of those paintings. There were a number of them, 68, in fact, in which he donates to the state and with the intention that it be displayed in a museum. And by accruing awareness and eyeballs and having that context afforded it, those works, those are now the artists that we typically associate with the French canon. All right. It looks as though things may have slowed down. I'll answer this one last question and then we'll wrap up for this evening. The capitalist in me says to sell the ashes, place them in a vial and sign it. They're art in their own right. I think they're art in their own right too. But I wonder if they're actually priceless. That's a tough thing to say. That takes a great deal of or a great lack of humility to say that because I burned a thing I made, the ashes that remain are priceless. But I don't know. I don't know. The capitalist in me is not as loud as the artist at present. So that's where I am at on that. Gang, I'm gonna take a look at the clock. It's 9:14, so we've nearly made it an entire hour on this live stream. I honestly don't know if it was successful. I do know that I enjoyed my time here immensely with you and answering your questions and kind of untangling some of these threads. It's always a nerve-wracking experience being on a camera, so I appreciate your patience as we went through this. The wave closes in 12 days. Well, technically 11 days, 23 hours, 33 minutes, and 35 seconds. I don't know what's going to happen between now and then. However, a couple of things to note. Here with this wave in particular, I have set up a link at the front page of the web-based installation in order to schedule a studio visit. I recognize that experiencing the art on a screen is different than experiencing it in person. And so if you are among the type of collector that wishes to see something with your own eyes, that opportunity is available to you. And I think it's probably a good one because frankly, I'd like to talk to you and that would be fun for me. That's it. Oh, one last question. Does that clock run nonstop behind you until the wave closes? More or less, yes. It stays lit. In fact, I'll be at Startup Week Louisville on Monday, and the clock will accompany me there. I'm giving a fireside chat on SOULED, which will be an interesting venue for that. Maybe I'll see you there. We'll see. All right, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. Thank you so much for coming to this, not knowing exactly what it would be. I look forward to continuing this conversation, quite frankly, for the rest of my entire life. So thank you very much. I am the artist ATB, and this is SOULED. Good night.